Fred White is the youngest fluent Tlingit speaker, but he has probably put in more actual hours in place name projects than any of us here. When you go on the project jukebox maps for Yakutat and click on any of the place names, it's Fred's voice that you hear on those. So I've asked Fred to talk about that experience at Yakutat and also a little about what he's doing right now with middle school students, which is really inspiring to me. And I think all of us agree is kind of what this whole place names project is for. Wayne Howell, a friend of mine, and his friend, Kenny Grant, are part of the reason that Glacier Bay National Park and Huna are still talking to each other. That's not a comfortable relationship, but I don't think any of us who come to Clan Conference feel that everything ends with comfort. We're all kind of putting ourselves on the line here. Wayne told us earlier in his presentation about Glacier Bay about the dynamism of that landscape and what an understanding of glacial history can bring to our understanding of oral traditions in Huna. So I'd like him to talk more about that and specifically about ground truthing. So I've asked Wayne to speak specifically about the process of ground truthing because names that we have on the maps, many of them, they go back over 50 years to Goldschmidt and Haas, and they were placed on a map by a discussion with an elder.
Microphone, please. Thank you.
In which there was a conversation, and the elder put his finger here. And we can't call that person back now to know exactly. We can't walk into the woods with him or her and know. In some cases, we need more precision than that. And it's people like Wayne that are doing that every day in their work, and that's pretty important stuff. Not just knowing the stories, but geographic precision. Where are these places?
So when I first started working at Glacier Bay National Park in 1995 as an archaeologist, the first iteration of the place name maps were just very early, in very early stages. They had just begun, and that was in 1995. And I think it was about in 1996 we got our first draft of the place name map for the Hunakalu, and I think it had 38 names on it or something like that. Not that many names, but in 1997 I was in a position where I was able to go do a year of archaeological survey, which is rare in my career. And so we had that first early generation of a map, and it included some names that we had never really located on the ground. And one of them, for example, was the name Hatadanuwu, which is a man's name of a fort, and it was located somewhere in the mouth of Berg Bay. And so using the skills that we'd picked up along the way, we went out on the ground and actually found the footprint of where that fort had been. It was basically an observation point. And then the light went on as, aha, you can use the place name map as a template for looking for archaeological sites. And we started to do that linkage, and since then.
Is that working? Yes, it is. How's that? Okay. Since then, I have been able to use, and then of course now the place name map has over 250 names on it for the Puna territory. Yakutat has a similar number, and we've been able to go out and on the ground locate many of those sites. It's really fun when you do that. It just brings the landscape alive, and then I wanted to start sharing that with others, and I wanted to start developing it not just for archaeological sites, but on a landscape scale. And so in the early 2000s, we initiated a project for doing that for the landscape, the glacial landscape of Lower Glacier Bay, and I gave a presentation on that yesterday, where we basically just took the ethnographic sources that tell all these wonderful stories of Glacier Bay, and we just using geology, built the landscape beneath it, and that really brings it alive. After we did that, I was with a group of Hoona school students, and we had them in Bartlett Cove, and we were walking around talking about these histories. And we walked them out to a place called Howell Point, which is a little point of land at the mouth of Bartlett Cove, not far from park headquarters. And I walked the kids out there, and there's a place where you walk down onto the beach, and there are about a dozen stumps sticking up out of the gravel. And those are the stumps that are the remnants of the forest that were growing on Seishuyi at the time that the Hoona people were living in Taosha-Shakian. And I stood the kids in that forest and said, okay, this is the forest of Seishuyi. And then we just stood back and watched what happened, and they just lit up. And one of the kids in particular, Carrie Ames is her name, started talking about that. She said, you know, that she had been hearing the Glacier Bay story her whole life, and it was always just kind of a fairy tale. It was just this sweet-sounding story that she really didn't have any context for it, and just kind of took it as a fairy tale. But then standing in that forest, it made it real, it anchored it, it brought it down, and made something palpable, and it really resonated with her. And since that time, we have initiated education programs where we continue to take kids out onto the landscape. And Richard was able to participate this year with us in a trip that Mary Beth Moss put together where we took Hoona High School, basically, out into Taylor Bay and did a similar thing, and the kids just came alive, and maybe we'll be able to talk about that in our discussion. In addition, I've worked for a number of years with the people of Gunahu, the Gunahu Kwan, and we've been able to go out onto the landscape, and any of you who caught Bert Adams' presentation this morning about the way we use this kind of information to locate, and technique, the archaeological technique, to locate the village of Gusaic, was really a powerful exercise, and it's an ongoing process as well, but it brings the landscape alive for people. One of the really wonderful things that Bert did this morning is that because the mouth of the Alsac River, Dry Bay, also has a number of landforms that anchor Raven creation stories. Bert started his presentation this morning with Raven and the creation of Raven, and then Raven's activities on the landscape, where you have landforms today that anchor these Raven creation stories. And Bert shared with us the one that's really prominent in Dry Bay about Raven and his footprints, Raven's footprints, in terms of the place where Raven interacted and brought in deep, began to hit the far out house. And working with Fred, I don't want to take any of Fred's discussion here, but working with Fred, we also identified a number of other Raven stories, and I'll just end with this one. So back in about 2003 or 4, after I had been working with the Gunahu Kwan and recording these Raven stories and kind of floating these bubbles out on the map about where these Raven stories were perhaps anchored, there was one story, one set of stories in Dry Bay that are interlinked where Raven crawled into a whale, which is, the whale is actually a landform called Bear Island. And Raven got in there, and it's where Raven turned black. The people tricked Raven, tricked the trickster, and Raven stood up, turned black, had to dig his way out of the side of the whale with his beak, and in the process of digging out of the fatty whale with his beak got encrusted with fat, and he flew up onto a place on the Alsac River just above Alsac Lake and used a gravel bar or a gravel slope up there to wipe the fat off his beak. And so I had that story kind of floating around in the back of my head, and I was with this group of people coming down the Alsac River on a river trip, and we were going along that stretch of river, and I was kind of just lazily thinking, wow, somewhere up here Raven wiped his beak, and all of a sudden I saw some rocks start to splash down in the water. First one, and then another, and then a big one, and I had the river, the guide pull over onto the bank opposite this slope, and we got out and looked, and I looked up on this slope, and there was a perched gravel bar way up about, I don't know, probably 100, 150 feet up the slope, had a big V-notch cut in it, like that, and it was actively eroding gravel that was coming down the chute and splashing into the river. And I think that was where Raven wiped his beak, and it's a geologically active spot where he's maybe still wiping, but it gives you a sense of the size and shape of Raven's beak, okay? Which is pretty big, by the way. And so just having those stories in place, in mind, and not necessarily knowing where they are, but as you move through the landscape, looking for where they might be, and then connecting them to place is just really, once again, a powerful experience. And so I've shared with you just a few examples of the many hundreds of place names, and you could go to these place name maps and you could do this kind of exercise over and over and over again. And just think of the potential of that as an educational tool, working with school kids and getting them out on the landscape and having them experience it. And I will end actually with, for those of you who were at the banquet last night, honoring Richard Dunauer, and Steve Langdon read the story of the New Annie, or the poem of the New Annie, and remember that, how rich it was in terms of context and meaning, and the part about getting out on the landscape and stepping on the berries and wallowing in the strawberry patches in Dundas Bay and coming away with the odor of the berries on you. I think that's one of the things we want to achieve with this kind of exercise as well, is get the young people out on the landscape, have them experience it, have them taste it, have them smell like it, and come away with that kind of experience. And place names is the way to do it. It's the vehicle for doing it. So ground truth, getting on the ground and doing it. That's my perspective on it. Thank you. Go on, Susan.